Have you ever wondered what happens when absolute power falls into the hands of a man who is both paranoid and cruel? A ruler who sees loyalty not as devotion, but as a test of endurance, a test of pain, and sometimes even a test of death. Imagine an emperor who believed that the worth of his servants, his soldiers, and even his closest companions could only be measured in how much suffering they could endure at his command. This is the story of Caracalla, Rome's mad emperor whose cruelty was so relentless that he forced his men to march until their feet rotted, and whose paranoia made him turn even against his own blood. To understand his madness, we must first step into the turbulent age in which he rose, a time when Rome was both at its greatest height and on the verge of decline. Caracalla was born as Lucius Septimius Basanius in the year 188 CE, the son of Septimius Severus, one of the most capable generals ever to seize the imperial throne. His father was stern, ambitious, and ruthless, and his mother, Julia Domna, was a woman of sharp intellect in Syrian nobility. Caracalla, even as a child, was raised in the shadow of military life. He grew up not in the gentle luxuries of a palace, but in the roar of camps, the clang of weapons, and the endless sound of marching feet. His father believed Rome's survival rested on the discipline of its army, and Caracalla absorbed this lesson to the extreme. From his earliest years, he displayed a violent temper and a frightening lack of restraint. Ancient historians described him as a boy who could not endure insults, a youth who exploded in rages at the slightest offense. He was small, stocky, and not particularly handsome, but he possessed a restless, brooding energy. His father renamed him Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, linking him to the beloved philosopher Emperor Marcus Aurelius in an attempt to give him legitimacy. Yet the name that history remembers him by came from something else entirely: Caracalla, the long Gallic cloak he wore constantly, a fashion statement that became an unwanted label. When Septimius Severus died in 211 CE, he left behind two sons to rule together, Caracalla and his younger brother, Geta. The idea was that they would share power, balancing each other, ruling as co-emperors. But the brothers despised each other. They divided the palace down the middle, kept separate guards, and refused to eat or meet together. Their mother, Julia Domna, who loved them both, tried to keep peace, but Caracalla's jealousy was too deep. Within the first year of their reign, he decided that one brother was one too many. In December of 211, under the pretext of a reconciliation meeting in their mother's chambers, Caracalla had Geta cut down by soldiers. Geta died in his mother's arms, bleeding on her robe, while Caracalla stood watching. From that moment forward, Caracalla ruled alone, and Rome understood the kind of emperor he was going to be. Caracalla's reign was defined by blood, paranoia, and endless marching. He feared conspiracies at every turn, seeing assassins in shadows and traitors in whispers. He surrounded himself with soldiers, favoring the army above all other parts of Roman society. To the common people, he offered distractions, games, and bread. To the provinces, he offered the promise of citizenship through the famous Constitutio Antoninian, which granted Roman citizenship to almost every free man in the empire. But even this act, often remembered as progressive, was partly driven by greed. It expanded the tax base, filling imperial coffers drained by his endless military campaigns. But what set Caracalla apart from other cruel rulers was not merely his paranoia or his murders, but his obsession with punishing endurance. He forced his servants, his guards, and even his most loyal attendants into displays of obedience so extreme they bordered on torture. Caracalla loved the march, the endless rhythm of soldiers' feet pounding the road, the sound of armor clattering, the image of men driven forward through exhaustion. To him, marching was proof of loyalty, proof of strength. He would lead his armies across vast distances at brutal speed, forcing his servants and slaves to follow. Those who lagged behind were whipped. Those whose feet blistered were mocked. And those who collapsed were sometimes left to die. Ancient accounts speak of men whose feet literally rotted from the endless marches, their flesh torn, bleeding, infected, yet still being driven forward by a master who took satisfaction in their suffering. Caracalla himself would walk among them, his short body clad in armor, refusing to ride a horse even when others begged him to. He wanted to show himself as one of them, as a soldier's emperor. But while the legionaries might admire his toughness, the servants and attendants, forced to keep pace without the same training or resilience, paid the price. They marched until their sandals shredded, until the soles of their feet turned black, until the pain consumed them. Caracalla saw this not as cruelty, but as proof of devotion. He measured loyalty in miles marched, in bloodied footsteps, in men driven past the limits of endurance. Behind this mania lay a deeper madness. Caracalla had come to identify himself with Alexander the Great, the Macedonian conqueror who, centuries earlier, had carved an empire across the known world. Caracalla idolized him to obsession. He read about him constantly, styled himself in Alexander's image, and even recruited Macedonian troops to recreate his idol's army. He began to dream of new conquests in the east, believing that, like Alexander, he could march through Asia, defeating Parthians and Indians, becoming not just Rome's emperor, but the world's conqueror. His marches, brutal and endless, were not only exercises in discipline, but rehearsals for this fantasy of world conquest. But unlike Alexander, Caracalla lacked the charisma, the genius, and the loyalty of his followers. His men obeyed him out of fear and duty, not love. His cruelty eroded the very bonds he tried to strengthen. He would demand sacrifices from them without reward, punishments without justice. At Alexandria in Egypt, when the citizens mocked him and his family, Caracalla's rage turned into massacre. In 215 CE, he lured the people of Alexandria into a festival parade and then ordered his soldiers to slaughter them. Thousands were cut down in the streets, their blood staining the Nile's waters. This was the scale of his fury. Not only servants made to march until their feet rotted, but entire cities punished for laughter. The madness of Caracalla became a poison to Rome itself. His obsession with marching drained his men, his cruelty alienated allies, and his paranoia made life at court unbearable. Senators feared his glance, generals feared his suspicion, even his mother, Julia Domna, who once was his closest supporter, lived under his shadow until she took her own life after his death. For Caracalla's reign would end as violently as it began. In 217 CE, while traveling east on yet another campaign, Caracalla stopped along the road to relieve himself. There, in the middle of a march, one of his own bodyguards struck him down with a dagger. The emperor who forced others to march until their feet rotted died in the dust of a roadside, his blood soaking into the ground, his dream of becoming another Alexander crumbling with him. But Caracalla's story didn't end in silence. To the Romans who survived him, he remained a symbol of madness given power. They remembered the endless marches, the feet that rotted, the servants who collapsed under his commands. They remembered the massacres, the paranoia, the endless cruelty. They remembered that for Caracalla, loyalty was not love, nor devotion, nor service. It was suffering, and the willingness to suffer at his command. His reign stands as a brutal reminder of what happens when cruelty disguises itself as discipline, when paranoia dresses itself as strength, and when an emperor believes that the only way to prove loyalty is to endure pain without question. The madness of Caracalla was not only his own downfall, it was a wound in the empire he ruled, a scar that history has never forgotten. And so when we ask the question, what happens when a king forces his servants to march until their feet rot, the answer is not only found in their suffering, but in the destiny of the man who ordered it. For no empire, no matter how strong, can survive when its ruler mistakes cruelty for greatness and madness for power. Thanks for watching.